Greens, we saw Luke Foley yesterday, which was a bit of a fluke, and he's quite supportive. And I think, you know, he with us got that medical cannabis inquiry in New South Wales Parliament going. Was it last year or the year before? Mike Baird has been touched by Dan Haslam, which I thought was terrific, but I think he's got trouble with the rest of his party coming on board. But John Kay from the Greens is going to be here and talk. He is here. So we're going to make him listen to the Americans for an hour or two and hear what's happening over there. We might defer Andrew. Andrew can say a word. Well, we've got Chris and Mikki to talk, and we thought John's got to leave by 2. We really appreciate you coming, John. Really do, and appreciate the Greens' efforts on getting this happening. You're in a difficult position not being able to initiate legislation, but you can certainly poke them in the arse a bit, make them move. So I might, instead of Andrew, we wanted John to hear from the Americans. Might get Chris and Mikki. You going to talk first or Chris? And they've got a PowerPoint presentation, if we can get it all working. Is that right?
That's right. Mikki was going first.
Mikki is going first. Here she is. This is Mikki Norris. Now both these guys have been at the forefront of changes in America for, did I say 40 years? Was that too long? 30. 25. Mikki, thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to Jamie and Andrew and all the people who made this happen today and invited us to participate. So I've been involved in this since 1989, and when Chris developed a 5-year plan to legalize it, well, unfortunately, it's obviously taken a lot longer, but we have made some good progress, so we're excited that we're on our way. Don't worry if you can't read it, because I'm basically going to be going over the PowerPoint anyway. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the state of cannabis reform in the U.S. As I said, we have made some good progress. My projects that I've been involved in over the years, I've been involved in many aspects of cannabis reform, from public education to publishing the newspaper, the West Coast Leaf newspaper, to writing a book called Shattered Lives, Portraits from America's Drug War. And we also had a traveling photo exhibit of prisoners of the drug war that we brought around the country for many years. And I'm the director of the Cannabis Consumers Campaign. That is a website, cannabisconsumers.org, that encourages people to come out of the closet and to show who you are and stand up for our equal rights, basically, is what it comes down to. So let me start, and hope I can figure this out. Let's see. So the context of the progress that we are making is still the fact that we are in a drug war that is still raging. It started pretty much in its more current form with President Nixon in 1968. It really amped up when President Reagan was president in the 1980s, and they created these mandatory minimum sentences and conspiracy laws that made it so that you didn't even need any drugs or any physical evidence to be convicted. It is based on a lot of hearsay and things like that. So it's still raging. We still have the mandatory minimum sentences that make it such that if you have 100 marijuana plants, you would be eligible, or good chance you could get a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence. And that means they can't take into consideration any of the facts of the case. It's just if you have 100 plants or 100 kilos, then you would automatically get a 5-year mandatory minimum. or a 10-year mandatory minimum if you have 1,000 plants or 1,000 kilos, and they can add them up over years. So we know some people, fortunately, a couple got a doctor, Molly Fry, and her husband just got released from prison just, I think, now. And they had a few plants growing under 100 plants for a few years consecutively. They added it up and then they put him in prison for 5 years. But right now we have about 750,000 U.S. arrests per year. About 88% of that is for simple possession alone. So that's a lot of people still getting trapped and picked up. And the drug war basically has made the U.S. the #1 incarcerator in the world. We're #1. But we have about 707 per 100,000 people in prison, compared to Australia that has 143 per 100,000. So in the land of the free, we are still, very actively arresting and incarcerating people. And what's driving this prison rate really is the drug war, because we have almost 500,000. We have 500,000 people incarcerated for drug offenses in the U.S. now. Almost half of the federal prison population are there for drugs. And fortunately for marijuana prisoners, I should say only have, but still way too many. We have 40,000, about 40,000 to 60,000 or 80,000. We're not sure how many people are currently behind bars today on a marijuana offense, but it's still way too many. And marijuana is still illegal federally, and it's still a Schedule I drug, meaning it's the most dangerous drug category with no accepted medical use and high potential for abuse. So we have kind of two tracks. If the feds get you, you can be facing some serious time. In California, where we're from, if the state gets you, there's a good chance you can avoid prison or get a much shorter time. If you're in a state like Oklahoma, we know people who have gotten 90 years for 5 plants, but fortunately it wasn't a mandatory sentence, and the guy only had to serve about 11 years before he got out. But there's still people, we hear stories of people who are in prison for a joint, for many, many years. So it varies greatly throughout the United States. But in California, we're definitely making a lot of progress. But what's happened is that this has really had a very racist way of implementing or impact, and where people of color and poor people are getting charged and arrested. There's targeted enforcement in different neighborhoods, and lack of good representation, and many of the people are getting the disproportionate sentences in prison. So they majorly outweigh their numbers in representation in the criminal justice or injustice system. What is this? Chris added a nice, this is arrest rates, okay. From 1966 to 2011, it's majorly gone up for marijuana arrests. They say there's a marijuana arrest about 1 every minute or so. So what happens if you're arrested, and the harsh consequences of prohibition? Well, people end up with a criminal record, and that has its own problems that result from that, the stigma, the loss of money and jobs and homes and cars and computers and benefits and licenses, professional licenses, and in some cases people lose their right to vote. And there are instances, even in California, with medical marijuana, where people are losing their children, custody of their children if they're arrested. If there's marijuana around, the Child Protective Services will take them away and put them in foster care until they can manage to get them back if they do. And that's been a very serious problem in California. Even the presence of a plant that they're afraid that a child might get into has been grounds for taking them away, or even with nursing mothers, if they test positive for THC, we've heard stories where they will not allow their mothers to nurse, and even though there is no evidence of it really causing any problems for that. There's employment discrimination going on where people are subject to that. Do you have drug testing here for pre-employment? Some? Okay, well, there's a lot of that's going on in the States still. So if you test positive, you're not going to get the job. So it's like really, to me, drug testing is a tool of discrimination because it doesn't do anything but identify whether somebody used cannabis in the last few weeks or months or several months if they test your hair, because it can stay in your hair for for about 6 months or so, and it even stays in longer if you're a dark-haired person. So there's more discrimination there again. So we found that this is a real violation of our equal rights, and I feel like I'm a good person. I don't deserve to be treated like a second-class citizen in my country and vulnerable to arrest and incarceration for something that is even what President Obama said is safer than alcohol. He's even admitted that, but yet they still keep the prohibition going. And it violates our rights on many levels, where people who use alcohol responsibly, get preferential treatment over people who use cannabis. And to me, that's discrimination once again. But really what's happened is this big waste of our resources. It's criminalizing good people, and it's feeding into the unregulated market and the cartels. And in California and in Colorado, actually, they're saying that the fact that they're moving forward and people can get legal access to cannabis is having a big impact on the drug cartels coming in from Mexico. It's cutting way into their profits and that whole thing. But prohibition has also led to a lot of environmental damage in our public lands and our forests, where people feel that they're growing there because they're not going to be subjected, they're not going to lose their land, they're not going to lose their property if they're caught. And meanwhile, it's unregulated and it's causing diversion from the streams and things like that, and creating other kind of havoc on the environment, and making some of our public national parks a little unsafe if you go off the beaten path where people might be growing a crop there. So we're all in favor of regulating it to a certain degree to get it, under control. So the latest polls show at least 80% of Americans back medical use. And now, here's the good news, we have 23 states, plus DC, Washington, DC, and Guam allow for medical marijuana use. And that's been by initiative, where the people collect signatures and put it on the ballot and they vote for it, and through also legislative processes too. So here are the states. We have Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. So in those states, if you go visit there, and there's a good chance if you are in possession of a doctor's note, although there's no reciprocity in general. If I'm a Californian and go to one of these other states, I'm not really protected. You have to get a recommendation from a doctor, and it's recommendations, not prescribing, because it's still illegal federally, and to prescribe you have to have a federal license to prescribe. And it's Schedule 1, so you still can't do it. But there are thousands of doctors now all over the United States recommending marijuana to their patients. And there's a variety of models as well, from pretty wide open. And California is the most liberal form of regulation, and where anybody can get a doctor's note if you have about anywhere from about $45 to a couple $100 to go into a clinic and get why you need medical marijuana, why it helps you medically. And there are people, the doctors feel that the drug war is much more harmful to your health than cannabis will ever be. So some places just give you immunity from arrest or an affirmative defense. If you get caught, then you can say why you're using it. And in many places, California, we have that, well over 1,000 places called dispensaries where you can go and buy cannabis over the counter with, as long as you have your doctor's recommendation. And it's pretty exciting to see the variety. I mean, there's many strains of bud that you can buy, different kinds of hash, shatter, wax, oil, and all kinds of edibles that you can get, from drinks to sauces to chocolates to gummy bears to all kinds of ways of ingesting. And so that's exciting. And some places require you to register with the state as a medical user. In California, that's only voluntary, but it gives you a level of extra protection if the police pull you over. And so some people go that route. Some places have taxation, where they tack on a 5% or 10% that goes to the local cities. And most of them allow some kind of home growing, either anywhere from 3 plants to 99 plants. In some areas where they allow people, if you have a doctor's note, you can grow 99 plants on your property without a problem. At 100, that's where the mandatory minimums kick in, so we say stay clear of that so you don't have that kind of problem. So some cities in California have also been resistant, so it's not, all over the state where it's very liberal, and some cities have made bans where you cannot cultivate your own or open a dispensary. But in California, we have about 1 million people who have doctors' recommendations. So we're making some progress there. And there's, many more who don't, but that's another story. And so now the trend in these conservative states that they don't want THC, but there's 12 states now that have passed laws that allow for CBD oil with limited immunity from prosecution. That's Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Iowa, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Utah, Virginia, and Wisconsin. So that's exciting that they're getting it, but it's so limited that there's no access. I mean, nobody's providing it to them, so the parents have to go. It's been pushed by parents with epileptic children who need this medicine for seizure disorders. And in most of them, it's just limited to epilepsy. Whereas in Florida, they're going to open it up to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and PTSD and cancer, but it's still, they have no way of getting it. So people often have to go over to Colorado and pick up their medicine and bring it back. And if they have their doctor's recommendations, sometimes might require 2 prescriptions from their doctors to be allowed to do that. That's what they have to do. So And some of these bills in those states just allow the trials and the research, but they're so limited because we know that actually for the CBD oil to work well, it might need some THC in it. It's good to have the CBD-rich strains, but really to get the full benefit of the plant, the THC helps that as well. And so one state, Utah, is going to allow industrial hemp research plots to create cannabis oil, CBD oil. So we also have moves towards legalization. I mean, in the places in California, we've had legal medical marijuana since 1996. And in other states, we brought a lot more along in the 90s. And we've come a long way. And the majority of Americans favor legalization. The latest poll that's really respected said 52%, though 58% by the Gallup poll, and 61% favor legal cannabis for adult use. And more states are moving just towards decriminalization, just to take away the prison possibilities, but they still are subjected to fines. So in my mind, decriminalization really doesn't go nearly far enough. There's 4 states now: Colorado, Washington, Alaska, and Oregon, and Washington, D.C. that have some form of adult use legalization, where they're going to be taxing and regulating the sales. Not in D.C., they're only going to allow some home growing there and personal possession of 2 ounces. What's that, 56 grams they will allow. But Washington doesn't allow home growing, but if you have a medical recommendation, you can grow your own medicine. And there's been a few challenges to the state laws. Neighboring states of Colorado are trying to force them to stop doing that because they're afraid that people are going to Colorado and coming back and bringing that marijuana home. And but the exciting thing is in 2016, we expect to have more states coming on board with adult use legalization. And we expect in California, there's been a promise of money to get adult use legalization on the ballot. We expect it possibly in Arizona and Nevada and Maine as well. And there's going to be some legislative pushes also in Hawaii, Maryland, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And kind of a troubling development is in Ohio and Michigan. There are some forces that want to have legalization, but they also want to have a monopoly and write it into their constitution that only these 10 companies can produce all the cannabis for their state, which is kind of weird because we want an open market ultimately in this. And there's more. Recently, the veterans are gaining more rights to use medical marijuana in states that allow it. So that's been a policy shift, and for veterans in those states that use marijuana who also take opiates for their pain, they have traditionally been not allowed to use cannabis. They had to make a choice, either cannabis or the opiates, but now they're going to allow them to use both. So that's a good development. And there's been a formation of a new international coalition called the International Medical Cannabis Patients Coalition, and that's gearing up for the 2016 United Nations Global Commission on Narcotic Drugs. And they want to put forth change the treaties. So we need to do that also on an international level. And there's a group called the Global Commission on Drug Policy that includes Richard Branson, and Kofi Annan, and a lot of high-level people who are coming out and saying, you know, it's time to end the drug war and amend these treaties and stop the suffering of the people from the consequences of these terrible policies. And the promising news also is that the reports show there's no increase in youth use in the medical cannabis states. There's lower crime rates. The assaults have gone down, the homicides have gone down, and there's fewer traffic fatalities as well. And President Obama's been kind of a mixed bag with this whole thing. He puts out these policy objectives through our Attorney General, Eric Holder, and they send this message that we're not going to make it a high priority in the states that have legal cannabis. They still want to go after interstate commerce or smuggling or things like that. But he keeps putting out these things as saying, you know, moving it in a good direction, but we still have some resistance from the U.S. attorneys in these various jurisdictions that are still spending, and the DEA that are still going, Drug Enforcement Administration, that are still going after people. So it's still, you know, still a ways to go. And a recent development is with the Native Americans that have their own lands, and they're supposed to have sovereignty on their reservations. And they just made a new policy that said they will allow them to grow cannabis on the native lands, which is kind of exciting to see. Right now, they're highly invested in casinos and have the monopolies on those, but we don't want them to have a monopoly on native lands, but we do want them to have that ability to grow. So in 2016, we also have a presidential election, and that usually brings out the young people, and that's why we want to have the initiatives on the ballot in 2016, because they'll come out and vote for it, because the polls show that young people majorly support the legalization of cannabis. And we even have 3 very conservative Republican candidates who are coming out and saying, okay, we'll allow the states' rights to determine what they want. And we're not sure where Hillary Clinton, who's the presumed Democratic candidate, stands on this, but if she knows what's good for her and her constituency, because Democrats are much more in support of it than Republicans, she'll change her tune or go along with it. And the Green parties, by the way, throughout the United States are all in favor of legalization and medical cannabis as well, although they don't have any representation in the Congress. They have a few people who have been elected at the local level in city councils. But we're pretty much a 2-party system, unfortunately. But recently, a very exciting bill has been introduced in the U.S. Senate, and they call it the CARES Act. And it stands for Compassionate Access, Research, Expansion, Respect States Act. And that was just introduced, and that would allow states to legalize marijuana for medical use without federal interference. It would permit interstate commerce in cannabidiol, the CBD oils. It would move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, which still makes it a dangerous drug, but it would allow doctors to write prescriptions for it, and that would be nationally, so that would be exciting. Although we really want it to be descheduled and treated more like an herb, or scheduled lower on the scheduling to 3, 4, and 5, which is where more of the medications are. And it would allow banks to provide checking accounts and other financial services to marijuana dispensaries. And that's been a big problem so far, because the people are they're taking in lots and lots of money at these dispensaries. And they are not allowed to put it in the banks or write checks or do what you need to do to run a business, so they're actually vulnerable in that way. Also by other advocacy and lobbying groups to change that, because they realize how dangerous it is to keep that to prevent people from using the banks. And if this bill would allow the Veterans Administration, physicians, to recommend medical marijuana to veterans, so that's really good, because we all know it's been so vital in their PTSD and pain and dealing with all their injuries when they come back from the wars. And it would eliminate barriers to medical marijuana research. And there's been a lot of barriers, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Let's see. So there's still a lot of work ahead. You know, we have resistance by the whole drug war industrial complex. People who are relying on the big money that comes in to support their jobs, and in law enforcement and prisons and prison construction and the courts. And we have private prisons that have major lobbyists there, and the politicians as well that have been obstructive to any kind of change. The National Institute on Drug Abuse has created obstacles to research and is ignoring research already done, because their mission is only to look for harms of marijuana, not for any benefits. And people are still getting arrested, so we need to change those federal laws. Medical cannabis patients have been kicked off of organ transplant lists. So somebody waiting for a liver, if they're using medical marijuana for their ailments, it helps them greatly to deal with their hepatitis C or whatever else is causing them to need this transplant. It's been really bad that some people have been kicked off because they tested positive for marijuana in their system. So that still needs to change, and people are working actively on that issue, but it's still a problem. And there's still problems with people getting employment. And they're firing some of their best workers. And what we found also in the high-tech industry, that many of those companies have stopped drug testing because they know that cannabis users are, creative people, and they kind of count on them for their computer programming and things like that, so that they're stopping to drug test them, because they know it's not doing anything except testing whether or not they used it. It doesn't test impairment, doesn't test whether you're qualified to do a job or anything like that. So, let's see. And the National Institute on Drug Abuse has had a monopoly on the cultivation through the University of Mississippi, where they grow all the marijuana we have now 2 federal patients on the federal investigational new drug program. So 2 people in the whole United States get their cannabis from the government. That's grown at the University of Mississippi. And they've had a monopoly. The other people have tried to get permission to grow for research purposes, and they've stifled them. But I think that's going to be opening up, especially like in Colorado, where the research is starting to happen from their own permitted grows there. And let's see. So we still need to educate people about cannabis. Seniors are the fastest growing demographic of cannabis users, because it's so good for so many of the conditions that people face as they get older, for insomnia, for depression, for appetite, for arthritis and glaucoma and cancers and all kinds of things that they benefit from. And so what we need is to come up with some better models for legal market. We need to protect the right to grow your own, which will keep the prices down. We need to and also enable people just to have their own gardens and to control their supply. And we need to enable a system where small growers and producers, and traditionally it's been the small growers who provided us through the years, we want them to be able to continue in a legal market as well, much like the small microbreweries produce their own beers. I think there's a place for the small growers and not corporations, big, massive corporations. I think there'll be a place for them too, but we really want to protect the small growers. And we need to work on setting prices and the taxes at a good rate, otherwise it's going to continue with an illegal market. If we don't get the prices down, in the state of Washington, they've tacked on a 25% taxation rate at the production and at the, I think, the distribution and the retail. So it's like they have a 75% tax on it. And so the prices are so high that people are still going elsewhere. Because there's thousands of people growing in the United States, and especially in these states that have medical marijuana, there's thousands of people growing. And we need the protections for the consumers so that they can, especially in these states, they should be allowed to work without having to worry about just testing positive in their urine or their hair or their blood or their saliva, because we know that even experienced users will have a lot in their system and they're not really that impacted. And many people who smoke a lot aren't even really feeling high that much anymore, and they're not impaired. So we really need to produce a system of impairment testing, because we want to protect the public safety, but we need impairment testing so that we can see whether or not somebody is impaired, rather than just whether or not they have the presence of inert cannabinoids in their system or metabolites. And we also want to make sure that there be economic opportunities in the market, in a legal market, for disenfranchised people, the poor people and people, communities of color, people with arrest records, and minorities. And we need to be able to give them jobs and not prevent it. Because in some places they say if you have a criminal conviction, they won't allow you to work in these places. And it's kind of ridiculous, especially for people who have been arrested for marijuana offenses, to be prevented from working legally, because they're already having a lot of problems getting jobs otherwise. But a big problem that we're facing is complacency. We have about 25 million consumers in the United States, at least in the last year. About 15 million regular consumers in the country. And some people feel like there's a problem, like, oh, well, it's not a big problem. I'm not really getting in trouble. I don't need to do anything to change the laws. But, and we need them to come out and vote. So we have to make sure that people really understand that they're still vulnerable to arrest, incarceration, and discrimination if they don't come out and change these laws. So, let's see. Where am I? I think I hit the wrong button. Where am I? Sorry. So the forces for change in the United States are the patients. We need patients to tell their stories. That's the most important thing that they can do, is get out there and talk to the media, talk to their friends, talk to their family, talk to their coworkers, let people know how much it benefits you. That's how we're making change. Parents who have these children who are suffering from epilepsy and seizure disorders, and themselves who need to come out and show that parents are in support of this, that we want to, in fact, we want to do this for the sake of the children, so they don't have to grow up in a world being afraid that their lives or their futures will be destroyed by these bad laws. And the veterans are also starting to speak up, because we have so many coming back from the wars, and they're knowing that cannabis is helping them so much dealing with their problems. And some of the major advocacy groups in the States is the Drug Policy Alliance, and they're going to have they have an international drug policy reform conference every 2 years, and one's going to be happening in Washington, D.C. in November. I highly recommend it. It's very exciting to be a part of that group. The Marijuana Policy Project, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. There's a group that's been working for many years for patients, which is Americans for Safe Access. The American Civil Liberties Union, and then on the hemp realm, we've got Vote Hemp and Hemp Industries Association. And we've got this group called the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and that's been a really powerful group made up of former law enforcement people, cops and judges and prosecutors who've come out and said, you know, the war against marijuana really is not working, because when we started the war, we only had, what, 60,000 users, and now we have 25 million users, so it's clearly failed as a policy. And they also want more regulation. They want a place where people can go and buy marijuana legally to get rid of the black market or illicit market, where they'll card people to see if you're of age to use it, not by leaving it open to anybody who wants to sell to your kids. And so they've been a really good force for change, and maybe they're active here. I don't know. They have some here too. That's really great, because they've been really good. They come in with those credentials and say, "Hey, I used to fight for the drug war. Now I know that it's wrong, immoral, and we need to change that." And so they've been a powerful voice. And we have Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. That's also been lobbying. An exciting development in recent years has been the National Association, NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Thank you. I don't know why I'm blanking on that all of a sudden. But they were against legalization for a long time, because they saw in the neighborhoods of the African American neighborhoods that they felt like drugs were a scourge on their neighborhoods. But now they're realizing that what's happening is that so many of their young men have been caught up in the getting arrested and sent to prison for many years, and it's so destructive to their communities that they feel that the racial profiling and more African Americans going to prison at a disproportionate rate, that they feel that it's time to legalize it so that we can control it and not create those problems, because it's become very racist in its enforcement, and they feel like this is one way of getting rid of that. And labor, there's been some labor union support. In fact, in some of the dispensaries, they're organizing the workers to join the United Food and Commercial Union. That's been taking on these workers and getting them benefits and more job security as much as they can get, and when it's still illegal federally, and there's still resistance at the state level. But also there's been good forces for change on the internet. That's been majorly successful in educating people. You can go there and find so much information. And the mainstream and social media, the stories have been changing lately. And there was a major, did you see the Sanjay Gupta CNN special? Is that here, maybe? Mm-hmm. Where they had a doctor who apologized. He was a very well-respected CNN doctor, spokesperson, who had been against medical marijuana, but then he went and saw these families with epilepsy and these other cancers and things. And he saw the benefit firsthand, and he changed and he apologized to the public for his prior stance. And that was almost like a tipping point, a very much a turning point. And the talk today really it's talking more inevitability. It's more not like if it's legalized, it's more like when it's going to be legalized. Yeah. So I'm really excited about that, you know. And the TV shows are mainstreaming use, showing it like, oh yeah, you know, everyday people are using it, and which is the truth. And so, and the image is changing because more and more people are telling their stories. So, you know, we need to legalize it. The world awaits change. I know that a lot of people are waiting on the United States to make their change because we're the most dominant and heavy-handed. And if we change ours, it'll be easier for the international communities to make their changes. But we applaud Uruguay and for the progress they've made in that regard, and Israel is plowing forward with the medical research and allowing it in hospitals to be used and people to use it. Italy? Yeah, lots of places. There's other places that are really going forward. And, Holland is still has their system, but they're also talking about getting more restrictive, and there's been efforts to try to limit it just to Dutch people being able to go into these coffee shops, which is ridiculous because they really need the tourism, and it's been such a sane policy of tolerance for so many years. And Spain and Portugal, in Spain now there's social clubs, pretty much like coffee shops. You become a member and you can go in and buy cannabis, and especially Barcelona and some other cities and areas. But I urge you to, that it's all time to take a stand. And one of the best things that I think we can do is come out of the cannabis closet and show our faces, because from my experience, and I would say that cannabis users are some of the most nicest, honest, hardworking, intelligent, creative people that you will know. And we don't deserve to have a treatment. We're the compassionate ones. We're the good people. We don't deserve to be treated like that. So by coming out of the closet, we're going to dispel the myths and stereotypes of who we are. And we claim, we'll regain and claim, our ability to define who we are and not have others put these labels on us. And so I urge you all to come out of the closet, stand up for your equal rights, and tell your friends and family, and they'll stand up with you. And with that, I just want to say thank you again for inviting me, and good luck to you in Australia for your efforts and what you can do here. We're all stronger if we can go forward too.